Welcome everyone to today's webinar presentation, Creating a Culture of Wellbeing, Taking an Employee-Centric Approach. My name is Maria and I am pleased to be your host for today's session. I am joined by a panel of experts who are going to share lots of insights. So let's take a look at the agenda for today. We are going to be looking at the employee experience based on Q1. We're going to dive into recent research collected on the employee perspective on well-being, and then dive into the implications of it. And then we're going to wrap up with a live Q&A session. This is where I'm going to invite you to share questions, comments, reactions to the data presented, the discussion being shared, so that we can answer those at the end of the conversation. With that, I want to turn it over to our presenters that have joined us today to kick things off with an introduction. So I'll turn it over to Miranda Smerling to get us started.
Thank you, Maria. Hi, everyone. Miranda Smerling. I work for WW or Willis Towers Watson. We are a global advisory broking and solutions company. I've been with WW for 6 years, working in our employee experience space. I specialize in employee listening with a particular focus and really passion for helping bring the employee voice to strategic decisions around total rewards, benefits, well-being. Very early on in my time here, we started utilizing Remesh's platform to support our employee listening work. It's been incredibly popular in an effective way of gathering rich and really actionable insights for our clients. And I am such a huge fan of the platform. So was very honored and overjoyed and humbled when I was asked to join and speak on today's webinar, especially around the topic of well-being. So thank you for having me here. I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you, Miranda. Thank you for joining us. We are delighted to have you with us. My name is Patrick Hyland. I am a strategic advisor at Remesh and an organizational psychologist. And it's really been a pleasure, Miranda, working with you and putting together our conversation guide for today and then analyzing the data. In the process, I think we both have learned a lot. This is really fresh data for both of us. And I think it'll be fascinating for us to take a look at really what we're hearing from employees as it relates to stress, stability, well-being in the here and now. So really excited to have this conversation. And I want to start just by putting things in context. As Maria was saying, we want to take a quick look back at Q1 and in a slide or two, try to encapsulate the employee experience. And I think what stands out as we take a look back here at Remesh is this topic of employee well-being has been salient the whole quarter. In January, we conducted our first webinar and field study where we asked 250 employees to look ahead in 2025 and tell us what they expected. As part of that first conversation in that first webinar, we gave those employees working in 250 different organizations the list of priorities that are listed over on the left, and they may be really hard to see, but we asked them to rank order those. And right at the top of all those different possible strategic priorities was promoting employee well-being. And I know for me, as a researcher, that was a bit surprising. I had caught up or been caught up with all the headlines about the future of skills, the future of work, Gen AI, important topics, but well-being in January emerged as the most salient issue. Then in February, we know that quite a bit happened in the global economy and in the US economy. Here in the US, the Conference Board, in their tracking of consumer confidence, saw a 7-point decline in February, and layoffs just really skyrocketed and continue to be quite prevalent here in the States. In March, we conducted another webinar, and in that webinar, we really wanted to get a sense and an understanding of how employees were coping with all of the change, all of the disruption, all of the possibility that was emerging. And so we asked this question over on the right, and we asked employees about how they're feeling. And what we found, reading from left to right over on the right-hand side of this slide, is that 8% didn't feel affected by current events, all the changes that we're seeing. But 62% were feeling either much more or somewhat more anxious and uneasy. And 3 out of 10 employees were feeling more optimistic, more positive about the future. So it has been quite a tumultuous first quarter, particularly here in the US, but also globally. And as we get ready for Q2, now just a couple weeks in, it looks like Q2 will be just as turbulent. So as Miranda and I were planning our work together and talking about what we wanted to present about and do research about in advance of today's webinar, we really started to focus in on what the employee experience is right now. How are employees feeling, especially around this very salient topic of well-being? And so we came up with these 3 very broad research directions. What are employees' most critical current well-being wants and needs, current state? How effectively are organizations meeting these needs? And most importantly, what can organizations do to help employees cope with or even thrive in current conditions? Those were directionally what we wanted to study. So with that in mind, let me talk to you about the field study that we both designed and then we conducted just about a week ago. It started last Wednesday. So as we dive into this data, really what we're trying to do with this study we conducted just a week ago is really focus in on well-being in the here and now. What are current state perceptions of the employee experience, employee well-being, and how well organizations are doing in terms of meeting the well-being needs of their workforce? If you've attended one of our webinars before, you probably have seen a study background slide like this and you know the routine, but let me just talk to you about what we did to put in context this field study. We really wanted to, as I said, understand employee attitudes about well-being, current state. And so we conducted a study last Wednesday, and we did something a little different this time. We continued to use Remesh Recruit, which gives us access to a sample of employees working in a cross-section of organizations. But what we did this time is we conducted actually a live session where we had everybody join and participate in the conversation together. And then we flowed that into a Flex. It's a really powerful way to do research and gather data quickly. And so we did this with 264 US-based employees. It's important to note that all the data we collected is just from US-based employees. And we decided to do that because of the unique conditions that seem to be going on here in the States. Just as we've done in previous field studies, we used a mixed method approach with a combination of closed and open-ended questions. And this Remesh platform, if you have used it, you know that one of the most powerful aspects of it is you as a participant are allowed to type in your responses to open ends so that you really can voice your thoughts and ideas and opinions, but you then start to see what other people participating in the conversation are saying. And you then are asked to endorse, to upvote or downvote those comments, those thoughts, those ideas that resonate with you. And it really provides us as researchers with an additional insight into what is most salient. And so as we looked at this data, and we're still in the process of looking at it, Miranda and I, it really starts to help us understand what employees want and need right now as it relates to well-being. In terms of the sample, all participants, as I said, were US-based, somewhat equal balance between men and women, slightly more female employees, 53%. We had a cross-section of generations, but you'll notice that 53% of respondents were millennials. We also had employees working across job levels, 25% in non-management, the rest 75% in some type of leadership level, all the way up to the C-suite. You may also note that a healthy proportion of this research sample is based on middle managers, 41% in fact. Participants are coming from a cross-section of industries, in particular technology, hospitals and healthcare, financial services and education, as well as manufacturing. And we wanted to get a sense, before we jumped into the diagnostic questions in our conversation, about the extent to which employees are working in organizations that have formal employee well-being programs. So that was one of the demographic questions that we asked up front. And what we found is that in this research sample of these 264 US employees working in a cross-section of organizations, 75% are working in an organization that has a formal employee well-being program, or employees know that or believe that they have a formal employee well-being program. 18% said they work in an organization that doesn't offer a formal employee well-being program, and 7% were unsure. So most of employees in this sample are working in organizations with formal employee programs. And as we go through the data, we'll start to see that this becomes a really interesting and important demographic to cut the data by. So we'll talk more about that. But that's the study background. What we wanted to know, first of all, is really we all, as researchers, as academics, as scientists and consultants, have our working definitions of employee well-being, and we walk into organizations with those. But we really wanted to hear from this cross-section of employees how they define employee well-being. And so that was the first question that we had. What does employee well-being mean to you? And we received hundreds of comments. And what really stands out as you look at those comments coded in Remesh through its auto code feature, which uses Gen AI to sift and sort all that data, is that for many employees, well-being is not necessarily a program or a policy. It's not necessarily a particular service. What really is salient when you look at these auto code content categories, this thematic analysis of all that open-ended data, is that for many employees, well-being means being supported at work, having a sense of balance, working in an environment where there's a certain amount of care, culture of care, relationships of support, and respect. You see that in those first four themes that emerge, the most frequent themes that emerged, and they also come through in some of the most endorsed comments that we're featuring over on the right. Employees wrote about the fact that when there's a sense of well-being, employees are happy and healthy, physically and mentally, emotionally. And the last comment down at the bottom, I think, really is one of the more popular comments and gets at what is a common understanding of employee well-being from an employee perspective. Employee well-being is when a company cares about its employees rather than, or you could say more than, explicitly about profit. So it's really this valuing of the employee. And one of the fascinating conversations that Miranda and I had as we prepared for this is her working model of how well-being in an organization really works. And she'll talk more about this, but she emphasized the importance of having programs, that's necessary, communicating about those programs, also very necessary, but really building this culture of well-being. And I think that comes through in many of these comments from employees themselves. We then wanted to know, given this working definition of an employee well-being from an employee perspective, how are employees feeling in response to recent events? And this is the same question that we asked a month ago. And we defined what recent events were for the population. Happy to send that out. But we tried to keep it very neutral and somewhat objective, highlighting political and economic and technological changes, societal changes. And here's what we see. What we found, and the results actually are a bit more positive in our April study in comparison to our March study, is that 42% of respondents are feeling either a much stronger or a somewhat stronger sense of optimism and well-being. Right below that, we see that 45% of employees are feeling either a somewhat elevated or a much stronger sense of anxiety and unease. And then 13% are unaffected. And so if you're trying to track how that compares to a month ago, I showed that data a couple of slides ago, we've gone from essentially 31% of employees feeling more optimistic to now 42%. We've dropped from 62% of employees feeling an increasing sense of unease now to 45%. And we're also seeing a heightened number of employees feeling unaffected by current events. So interesting to see a increasing level of optimism as we look across months. But I think what's more relevant for this study is when you take a look at this same data over backdropped in blue on the right, and when you start to cut that data by whether or not your organization has a formal employee well-being program or not, we really start to see some dramatic differences in attitudes that we're highlighting with some of these circled stats. Just to run through this quickly, what we found is that if you work in an organization with a formal employee well-being program, you are significantly more likely to feel a much stronger or a somewhat stronger sense of optimism and well-being current state. And it's the opposite if you're working in an organization that doesn't offer a formal employee well-being program. You are much more likely to be feeling a sense of anxiety and unease current state. If you're not sure, we're seeing some heightened levels of being unaffected. But I think what really stands out is the mere presence, the mere awareness of having a formal employee well-being program seems to be related with a current sense state of optimism and well-being. So we're starting to see the importance of at least one of those peers that Miranda talked about having formal programs and the impact that they have. I want to do one more slide and talk through a little bit more results, and then I want to invite Miranda into the conversation to see what she's seeing in the data. But what we did to follow up on that last data point is we asked those employees who are feeling an increasing sense of optimism and well-being. We separated them out and we asked them, what's causing you to feel that way? And we did the same for those employees who are feeling an increasing sense of anxiety and unease. We analyzed the data with the Remesh platform. We use the word cloud feature in the platform to really get a sense of what's going on in addition to the autocodes. And what really stood out as you look at the word clouds and as we look deeper at the data is that those employees who are feeling a sense of optimism and well-being right now were much more likely to talk about the fact that they feel supported. And that contrasted over on the right with a heightened sense of uncertainty about a number of different factors for those employees who are feeling an increasing sense of anxiety and unease. It also comes through in the comments. If you look over on the left, one of the employees who's feeling better right now said, I feel optimistic right now because the work environment has been improving, communication has been improving, I am better supported by my leader, and I'm finding better balance. And this is much different than the comment from one employee who's feeling increasingly anxious. That employee is talking about the fact that political instability, as well as economic turmoil from tariffs and other changes, is really causing me to feel uncertain and unsettled current state. So as we looked at this, there really seems to be this cultural aspect of well-being that is really serving as a ballast and a support when present. So Miranda, what stood out to you, either as I was reviewing these last couple of slides or as you were analyzing the data from just this initial data?
Yeah, I mean, it's all incredibly fascinating. And as I said, prior to us just kicking this off, how exciting is this that I get to kind of be going to be on the back end, kind of like what we do with our clients at WCW, and we have them reacting to the results in real time. So you're getting a little bit of a taste of that today, which is really, really fun for me to be part of. But if we think about a couple slides back, we in January seeing the well-being being at the top. It's not a surprise to me that that would be the case. I think one of the things that we've seen in our work and in our research is in times of uncertainty, well-being becomes even more important, even in economic uncertainty where the cost of programs are kind of under under a magnifying glass, employers are still doubling down on well-being. And this slide here shows us why it's so important. And so does the previous slide. What I think is really, really fascinating and great about this comment that we have on the left here is things that we're seeing: support, relationships, talking about leadership. Those are the things that previously were huge barriers to people feeling like they had a sense of well-being and support at work. Now we're seeing companies starting to really embed it into their policies, programs, culture, employee experience. It's not just checking a box that you offer these programs. It's about the way that you embed them into the entire experience of the organization. And we're seeing that loud and clear here. Not a surprise what we're seeing on the right. Well-being is critically tied to uncertainty. It serves a purpose, and it's to support people in times of uncertainty, including economic uncertainty. And so it just really emphasizes why well-being is going to continue to be incredibly important this year.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think the point that you made about the importance of well-being perennially, yes, all the time it's important, but particularly during times of uncertainty, really stands out. Makes sense, but to see it play out in the data is really, really profound and interesting.
Couldn't agree more.
So with this context in mind, what we wanted to then start to study or explore is how do employees feel about the well-being services and programs, the offerings that they're currently receiving? What we found, the good news, is that almost 2/3 agree that their organization is effectively supporting their employee well-being right now. If you look over on the left, we're seeing that only 14% disagree or strongly disagree with this statement. We're seeing the majority of employees really feeling supported. And again, over on the right, when you take this same data and you do that same data cut that I talked about, and you compare those employees that work in an organization with a formal employee well-being program versus those that don't have a formal employee well-being program, or those that don't know, again, we're seeing this positive lift that is associated with having an employee well-being program. Really remarkable differences. And just to highlight one, 31% of employees that work in an organization that has a formal employee well-being program strongly agree that their organization is currently doing an effective job supporting their well-being, contrasted with 4% of employees working in an organization without programs and 0% for those who aren't sure. So again, we're seeing the importance of employee well-being programs and services as a lift, a ballast, a source of support, current state. We wanted to know, when it comes to employee well-being, two things. What is your organization currently doing well? And how could your organization better support you? And really what we found is that well-being works when organizations promote flexibility, balance, transparency, and acceptance. That really comes out in some of the highlighted comments over in the blue field on the left. Employees are saying that what their organizations are currently doing well are things like promoting work-life balance, making sure that leadership is accessible, having open communication, something that Miranda really emphasized a lot as we were analyzing the data, offering mental health services and practices, and making sure that those are accepted and acceptable to take advantage of, and being transparent and communicating not just about our employee well-being programs, but about the state of the business, that providing a certain sense of trust, stability, and control. In terms of what employees want more of, they talked about increasing flexibility over on the right, offering resources and solutions that are more personalized, like health check-ins, wellness stipends, optional wellness days off, regular meetings to raise awareness, making sure that there isn't a pinch point or a communication gap between the services and the programs that an organization offers and what employees need. So really making sure that there's quite a bit of clarity, and then better pay and benefits, better offerings. But I think really what stands out here is the importance of culture and communication complementing having the right programs in place. We just a couple more slides. We wanted to know how satisfied employees are with their current programs and services. We wanted to get a little bit more into beyond the broad understanding of well-being, beyond the culture of well-being. When you think about the programs and services specifically that your organization is providing, over on the left, the good news is, again, we see that almost 7 out of 10 employees are currently satisfied with the programs and services their organizations are providing. And when we asked over on the right, well, what type of well-being programs does your organization offer? What we find is that really elevated levels, some pretty consistent data, hovering above or below 50%. But the most common types of well-being programs are emotional well-being programs, such as employee assistance programs, mindfulness programs, mental health days, followed by financial well-being offerings, then physical well-being offerings, and finally, last but least, not quite as common, social well-being offerings, things like team building, activities, social events. I want to pause here, Miranda. Was there anything that you were surprised about with the last couple of sets of slides or data? Anything about current satisfaction levels or the types of programs and offerings that organizations are putting on the table?
Yeah, well, as I shared with you, I was a bit surprised at how positive the results are, pleasantly surprised. I think that it shows organizations are getting better at this. They're continuing to prioritize and communicate and promote and embed in their human capital frameworks, and it's working, right? I love to see the spread across all of these programs. It used to be, and I'll talk about this in a moment, that well-being programs really focused on the physical and clinical aspects. And we started, and as organizations have started to spread that across and redefine and build kind of 4 distinct pillars, we're seeing that work in practice. I'm not surprised to see social well-being a little bit less than some of the others. Frankly, most of these companies probably do offer all those things that are in parentheses there. They're probably not branding them as social well-being. And I think that that speaks to an opportunity to better brand and promote it, because social well-being in today's world is going to be very important. Psychological safety fits under that, caregiving needs, all of those things fit under social well-being. And I think it's all about the way that you brand and communicate about it.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, this whole idea of social well-being, social capital, the relationships that we form, like you say, incredibly important. I would imagine much harder to pull off in this post-pandemic work at home or hybrid world, right? This was one of the biggest concerns as leaders struggled with, should we bring our employees back to the office or not? And many were focused on the social capital aspects, the camaraderie, the social well-being aspects.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And I also think social well-being is a hard one from a vendor perspective, right? We have vendors to support us for all of these other programs, and but in terms of vendors in the space, on the social well-being space, it's not as tapped into yet. I would say, from my experience, there's also not as much an appetite to really spend on those programs. It's a lot of grassroots programs. But yeah, it's become difficult. But as we see people more and more return to the workplace and to the office, people are starting to think about the work environment and the social environment that exists when they're here and how we can support people. Like, I think about my office I'm currently in, and it's hard. There's not a lot of spaces for me to go off and take a meeting and take a call, and that impacts my day to day, right? When I'm in the office. So the companies in reimagining kind of our workplaces. And so there's so many different ways that well-being touches us as employees throughout the life cycle. And I think we're just kind of hitting the iceberg on some of them.
Fascinating. Well, so, I mean, we're seeing quite a bit of satisfaction with current programs and services, and that's a delightful surprise for you.
Yeah.
You know, despite the fact that many employees in this cross section of respondents were satisfied, there were additional requests or ideas that we heard back. Many do want particularly mental and physical health support beyond what they're currently receiving, as well as more paid time off. We see that again in the open ends and the auto code summary. Right up top, mental health support and counseling emerged as the most common theme in the comments that we collected, followed by physical wellness programs, things like gym membership and increased paid time off. So really, we're seeing that many employees are satisfied, but many employees are also seeking, in particular, more mental health support and the ability to be physically fit and healthy. One thing really that is clear in all the data is this final point, and that is what we do see in this data, and what you know, Miranda, from all of your experience working with organizations, is that when well-being programs are effective, they really do make a difference for employees. The last question we asked of respondents was, how have you been feeling in recent months as it relates to work? Have you been feeling much more motivated, somewhat more motivated, somewhat less motivated? And what we see here is that 45% of employees are feeling either much more motivated or somewhat more motivated. 29% are really in the same state that they were for the past couple of months. And 26% are feeling less motivated. So, you know, somewhat of a bell curve of responses. But what stands out is that when you break that data by your perceptions of effective employee well-being support in your organization, we're seeing, again, dramatic differences. You may recall that one of the questions we asked a couple of slides ago is, what do you think of your organization and how well it is supporting employee well-being? And we separated employees based on their response to that question into two basic groups: those that feel supported or feel that their organization is effectively supporting employee well-being, and those that were either neutral or negative or didn't know. And so you can see that break over on the right. And we looked at this very same data, and what stands out is how much more motivated employees are when they are in an organization where they feel they are receiving the support that they need. Many of you know this based on your own analysis and your own research, and there's a lot of empirical evidence. But even in this study of 264 employees, we're seeing that connection. When employees feel supported, when they are working in organizations that offer well-being programs, it really does have this positive impact on their perceptions of the organization and their motivation around work. So with that wraps up the field study. I'd love now, Miranda, to turn it over to you to further contextualize this data and tell us really how organizations can take this and use it to work with their own workforce.
Great. Thank you, Patrick. It's such a perfect segue, that slide. It's like we planned it. But I think just to kind of reiterate around the work that we do, a particular area of focus for us is this piece around well-being. And that's because it touches all of the different ways that we support our clients across health, wealth, and career at WCW. And whether that's helping a client design and implement a well-being strategy or benchmark their current programs, select and manage different vendors, gather employee insights like we did today, or craft a really effective communication program, communication strategy to educate people on the program. Our work touches on well-being so much and every day. And I have some great research and insights to share with you all today about what we're seeing in the well-being space. especially around what's key for an effective program. But first, I want to provide some context on how we define well-being at WW. And we've hinted at this a lot throughout our conversation today, but over the years, the definition of well-being has progressed, and we're seeing employers globally evolve this approach. It was once really a one-size-fits-all approach, as I said, really focused on physical, mainly on clinical conditions. It evolved to then a more holistic approach that included four pillars of well-being: emotional, financial, physical, and social. And then progressed even further to go beyond just the benefits and programs and policies, but to really reimagine well-being at the heart and center of companies' human capital and talent strategy. So the pillars are the core, as you can see on the left here, in the foundation, but a truly successful well-being program is one that is embedded in the employee experience, the culture, and reflective of corporate values. So that is how we like to think about it at WW, and how we've seen our clients be most successful is by leveraging that. And I think a lot of the data that we saw earlier today reflects a lot of that. Great, we can go to the next slide. So we've heard from employees today, and much of the work that I do is actually working with clients using Remesh to gather insights from their employees on well-being. But we also have access to tons and tons of clients. So we do a lot of research at WW around what are employers thinking and saying as well. So I wanted to bring in that research to provide that context. Last year, WW ran a global survey of over 3,500 employers from around the world and gathered insights on employee well-being. And the results were incredibly informative and very interesting, and tie really nicely to what we're seeing in the field study today. So despite continued global disruption and economic uncertainty, employers continue to focus and invest in well-being to develop resilient employees for today and for the future. We know that companies are seeing this as a business imperative. We saw how effective that is, how even just having the programs can improve perceptions and feelings of security and willingness to work. But companies are also planning to expand their use of well-being as the basis for the human capital strategy, as I showed on the previous slide. In fact, companies that are highly effective in their well-being programs report higher overall performance. Our research showed that highly effective companies at well-being are actually 2 times more likely to report, or even more, human capital and better human capital and financial outcomes. That's, from better kind of finances, but also thinking about kind of retention, turnover, and also engagement from employees. They've seen incredibly strong improvements there. But we're still seeing some disconnect between well-being areas that employers are investing in and the ones that employees actually want more support from. And what's interesting is we didn't see a lot of this today in the field study, which is really fascinating. And I'm still kind of grappling with it and trying to make sense of it, given kind of what's going on in the world. We did see mention of mental health and emotional well-being, but what we didn't really see is a lot of mention of financial well-being. And actually our research on employee benefits perspectives actually tells us that that's an area where employees need a little bit more support and want more support from their employers on that. And it's not really an area that we're seeing a whole lot of previous investment from employers on, but is a priority for 2025 and will continue to be a priority in 2025, given everything that's going on. As we talked about earlier, there's really a shifting the culture part of this, and employers that are looking to grow and expand their strategy are looking to shift their strategy to actually embed it in the culture itself. And that's a priority over the next several years. I'm actually going to have you skip to the last slide here, past some of those data points that I talked over. Sorry, back one, thank you. And this is a little bit of a cheat sheet to building an effective and best practice well-being strategy. What we found is it needs to, of course, you need to have the programs, you need to have policies, you need to have the infrastructure and technology, but you also need to get these other pieces right. That's the leadership and stakeholder buy-in support from up top and below, even your grassroots supports. We're seeing a lot of clients have different ERGs that focus on different areas of well-being, kind of champions of well-being, and you need your communications and engagement strategy to really emphasize and promote your well-being strategy to make sure that people actually know about it. Because you could have the best programs in the world. If your employees don't know about them, they're not going to be taking advantage of them. And then the last piece that I could not emphasize anymore is measurement, measure. Not only in terms of benchmarking and making sure that you're at market, but this is kind of where I specialize and so really strongly promote. But in terms of gathering employee feedback, it is so important to make sure that you are getting a good return on your investment. Employers are spending so much money on well-being programs. They're putting a lot of energy into getting their strategy right. But what we really want to make sure is happening is also using things like Remesh to collect feedback from employees to make sure that you're actually offering what employees want and need. Most of the time, we find with our clients, you're actually offering a lot of what they're looking for. It's often that they're not aware of it, or when they do access that, they are having challenges with the vendor or the experience itself. So that kind of information, those insights to gather are incredibly important because oftentimes it doesn't require a huge investment on your part to change or add programs. It's about the way that you communicate and engage with those programs that can really have dramatic improvements and really lead to a successful well-being strategy. The world is shifting and there's a lot of uncertainty and continue to be a lot of uncertainty, and employees are looking for security. And one way that we feel that, you can offer that as an employer is through a really effective well-being strategy. And so this is not going to go away. This is going to continue to be top of mind and important for our clients and for their employees. And this is just kind of a little bit of a cheat sheet roadmap to ways that we've seen it be successful.
Really wonderful. And I think as we start to wrap up and we can open the floor to questions from the audience, a couple of things just come together as we think about this. I mean, we started by saying employee well-being is salient right now. We then end up finding a couple of important things. Having an employee well-being program makes a difference. Communicating around well-being is critical. You've really emphasized that. And then I think at the top, and maybe this is a blind spot in many organizations, creating this culture of well-being is important. I mean, that's where employees in our research sample started when they defined well-being. It's this sense of support, this sense of care, flexibility. They didn't focus first on the programs. And when you get all that right, what we find in this data set, but what you have found more robustly across organizations with all your research, is that it really has this positive impact on the business financially and from a human capital perspective. That, to me, seems to be what comes through this study. And is there anything you would add to that, or anything? Where would you start if that is kind of the equation? And I know you've laid out 5 really important things to do right here on this final slide. But any suggestion about where to start in this process of figuring out where your organization is?
Yeah, and I promise I'm not just saying this. This is actually kind of our position as WTW, but listening. That is where we start, and that is where we'd recommend measure, listen, both go out to your employees, figure out what's working well, what's not working well. And then also figure out how you're comparing to the market, because that's equally important. Take an inventory of your programs and map them to what you're seeing in the market and what you're hearing from your employees, and figure out where there are disconnects. And that's where you can then figure out where you want to go and focus, because you cannot, as we love to say in the consulting world, you can't boil the ocean, right? This may feel really abstract and big and a hard thing to tackle, but I think very simply, it starts with just knowing what you're working with and what you're dealing with. And I think that comes through employee listening.
Yeah, great. Very practical advice. Wonderful. Well, thank you, Miranda. We'd love to, I know we're at really the end of the webinar, but Miranda and I are happy to stay on for just a couple more minutes. If anybody in the audience has a question, please do enter it through the chat, and we're happy to take that. We'll wait just a couple of minutes. If people have to drop, or if we don't have any questions, that's fine. We will be sending out a copy of today's presentation. We will be summarizing this in a forthcoming insights report, so we'll send that out to you. Thank you all for participating as you may come up with your questions. And next month we will be focusing really on work, the experience of work, and how it's become so much more intense for many employees. So we're looking forward to that in May. The other thing I'll say, hopefully I'm not talking through everyone's questions, is Miranda, we really appreciate you joining. You provided so much insight and thought and perspective and wisdom, both in the design, but also the analysis and the understanding of this data. So it was really a pleasure and an honor for us to have you join. Let me be quiet and see if there are any questions before we start to wrap up. Going once, going twice. Well, we hope you all enjoyed. Thank you so much, Miranda. Thank you for joining, and we look forward to hopefully having all of you join us next month as well.
Thank you.